All right, what about it, YouTube? Okay, so this is the kind of debate I think we should be having. And Jimmy's got some questions for the MMT guy. And I think they could have been answered better. So let's see, we'll start with this first one. Basically, Jimmy's saying, why not just, if MMT says you can print all kind of money, why not just print 34 trillion and pay off the national debt? We'll listen to that, and this guy's answer, and then I'm gonna say what I would have said.
So if you can just print money and it doesn't matter how big your deficit is, why don't they just print $34 trillion right now and get rid of our deficit so that nobody has anything to bitch about?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the legal order of operations for actually doing that, but there is nothing theoretically that we couldn't, that says that we could not create $34 trillion. But what you would be doing is eliminating the safest interest earning asset. You'd be eliminating our ability to conduct monetary policy, because monetary policy, interest rate controls at the Federal Reserve are done via treasury bonds, the buying and selling of treasury bonds to ensure that we can hit the 6.5%, 7% interest rate, or when they slammed the interest rate to zero following the 2008 financial crisis. How they control that interest rate at the Federal Reserve is the buying and selling of bonds. Does that make sense?
So you're saying if
So I'm not saying he had a bad answer, other than it went way over Jimmy's head, and because Jimmy's still, this whole discussion kind of takes time to wrap your mind around. Even though it's once the light bulb goes off, then you're like, oh wow, I don't know why that was so hard to figure out. But it does, when it's the first time you've heard this discussion, and it takes you a while to accept and to believe that this is how monetary policy is happening right now. He ends up in this discussion explaining that MMT, 90% of it is just describing what is going on right now in real terms, without all the BS, without all the nonsense. And there's maybe 10% of prescriptive theory, but 90% is descriptive of what's going on. So this answer he gave, I would have just told Jimmy right out of the box, since it's going to take a while for people, like I said, is just tell him, man, there's no obligation to that 34 trillion. Okay? They call it a debt, but again, that's part of getting you to be gaslit into whatever phony discussion that the news wants to talk about economics. If they can get you started off with this idea that you're in all kinds of debt, they know that that's going to be this dark black cloud. You're going to run around saying stupid things like my grandkids are going to have to pay this back and all this nonsense. It's not an obligation. That's the easiest answer, and let's move on. Okay, so yeah, let's move on to the number two. Was it 3150, folks? Here we go. 30. And this guy right here, this jagoff that sells silver and gold, that wants your dollar bills, but at the same time he tells you they're worthless because the only way to have money is silver and gold. He's into scarcity, and he wants to price fix a commodity and peg us to a commodity, and says if you make gold an idol and you worship it, then it therefore has value. But we're going to get to why that's not even important. Here we go. Close enough.
Signed onto the European Union, right? When they started operating according to the euro, right? We don't, because there's an important distinction that needs to be made. The only issuer, within reason, is the federal issuer of the dollar is the federal government, right? Everyone else uses the currency. It's also interesting when people say, "Oh my God, this massive amounts of money creation at the federal level is going to cause massive devaluation of the dollar." Well, the overwhelming majority of the dollars in our economy are not created by the federal government. They are created.
So yeah, he's about to explain that, and this is where I think he could do it with the national discussion too. He kind of doesn't separate national, personal, and state, transactions in the way that they treat money and treat their debt. Okay, the federal government is not a household, so it doesn't pertain to any of the rules that you pertain to in your kind of buying and spending and borrowing. Okay, it's not how it works with them. All right, again, the national debt is not an obligation. So now he's going to start talking about how when you go to the bank, they newly create dollars from your credit, right? A promissory note is created based upon your credit, your demand to be able to use that credit. Your credit is saying that there's proof that this money should be in existence, right? You're saying there's a commodity out there, there's something, there's a car, there's a house, there's a lawnmower, there's something that I'm demanding the money for, I have the credit for. The only thing standing in the way of me getting this thing that I want is the money. But I have the credit, so the bank says, okay, here's the money. And then that money goes to the guy that sells the whatever it is, car, lawnmower, whatever, and he puts groceries in his fridge, and then that goes to the grocery store, and those people put groceries in their fridge, and it all goes around, right? Let's all remember that money's like manure. It's no good unless you spread it around. Okay. So he's going to go get into this, how you create money through your signature, through your credit. But he doesn't say that. That's the part that I wish he would talk about.
By banks every time you take out a loan.
So is that called fractional banking or fractional? Is that what so like?
I mean, that's how people describe it.
See, he should have busted that up too. Fractional reserve banking is when your usual suspects that all belong to a certain ethnic tribe, when they get together and they do this thing called usury. Part of that usury is fractional reserve. It's making you believe that ultimately you should have gold or gold backing. But then they say, okay, put your gold in the bank because it's too dangerous to carry around, and we'll give you this little piece of paper that says you got gold in the bank. And then you, but you go to borrow, say, some of this gold that you think's on deposit from Fred, who has lots of gold, and so you're borrowing against Fred's gold when you borrow to get your lawnmower or your car. And the bank looks in the vault and they're like, man, there's not enough of Fred's gold for us to give him this loan. What do we do? And that's when your usual suspects said, well, nobody's coming back for all of their gold today, so we'll just do a fractional reserve thing where how much do we really think we'd ever have to give out in gold? If somebody came and said, hey man, I want to give you back this paper and get my gold. Then they say, oh, okay, well, we only need maybe 10%, right, to carry on business. So we can BS that we have all this other on deposit that we can loan out, and we can inflate the economy with, okay, but see, if you price fix and peg to gold, then it's a ball and chain. Now to keep up with credit on demand, you're having to do something like a scam like fractional reserve. Because what's the other answer? You've got the credit, you want to go buy the car, you go to the bank, you say, hey man, I need the loan, and they say, well, you got the credit, but we don't have enough of Fred's deposits today, so, it's not going to happen. Then the economy shuts down. Okay? So does that make sense that you've got to have a scam if you have a ball and chain on your economy like gold? So his solution, this goomba over here, that I love his expressions, this Goomba that wants to, he can't wait to grab your worthless dollars and sell you the only money that there is, silver and gold. This Goomba, right, and believes that everything's scarce, so why not? And it's winners and losers in life, right? All ships can't rise. There's got to be winners and losers. Anyway, getting off track. But that's where this MMT guy, I think, slips. He doesn't explain very well that it's your credit, it's the government's credit. The idea is that there's resources and there's labor, and when they come together, there's value. And that value is to have a placeholder that represents that value. We're going to call it dollar bills. And those dollar bills are going to grease the skids of the economy as they represent the labor and the resources that they are backed by. The dollar is backed by labor and resources. That's all it needs, right? You don't need to add something in the middle like some ball and chain, like a commodity like gold in the middle of it. That's like your usual suspects or somebody else, right? That makes you have to go to God through them, right? It goes you, Jesus, God. All right? So it goes you, dollar bill, whatever you want. And you, your labor, your credit, whatever you want, right? There doesn't need to be this other thing in the middle of it, this idol that's placed in the middle of it, this idol that's placed between you and God, this idol that's placed between you and whatever. Okay, and when your usual suspects talk about an idol, it's interesting how they say that if you worship the one guy, then that's idol worship. But if you worship then it's not. Interesting. Anyway, that's getting a little bit off topic, but I don't want to explore this way too much more. Let's go to why tax people? Oh, I didn't write down the time. Good job, Rob.
When you read reports about corporate price gouging,
all right, there's a point in this video, I didn't write down the time, where Jimmy asks him, why tax people? If the government can print whatever money, why tax people? And he gives partly a good answer. He says, well, it creates a demand for the dollar. And that's true, but he doesn't explain it very well. And then he uses like a bad example to explain why you would tax someone to control activity or to control behaviors, right? Like, I agree with him with that premise, but he uses the worst examples to start off with that makes it sound like AIDS. I'm like, dude, what are you trying to do? Turn people away from it or what, dude? Explain it in a better way. So when Jimmy says, why tax people? I would say to start off with, yeah, you have this species called the dollar, and then you require it to in taxes from whoever, and then there's a demand for it because people have to settle up their stuff with this species. So it kind of just all magically works, right? But it would magically be that way anyway. You'd have to magically accept whatever it is, which is fine. I mean, I don't have a problem with accepting the dollar, not a problem. And I don't have a problem that is backed by labor and resources either. But to the tax on the people, this guy should come out and say that that's your usual suspects again, that there is no reason. When Jimmy says, why tax people, he should just come out again and just make it easy and say, well, you shouldn't tax people. You should create that demand through taxing governments. And then you could use that to persuade them to have good behavior. And he even talks about price gouging, but he doesn't connect that to his example. I'm like, why not, man? You already talked about price gouging earlier. Why not use that in your example and say you've got a corporation that's price gouging. You can hit them with taxes and suck up that money basically and delete it because they're not going to be able to run off on vacation to wherever and enjoy it because that's not cool, right? Like someone can abuse these powers at any point, but at least you'd have a mechanism. So let's say they're polluting or they're doing something that's not a public good, that whatever. That's where I would argue you can use the taxing, like raise the taxes on businesses that are not in good standing, okay? And lower taxes for companies that are in good standing. Immediately should recognize that now you've got maybe a DEI or whatever it is, or some other idiot thing that would come into play, and they would use that power wrongly. They'd say, okay, if your corporation doesn't hire 100% transgenders, then we're going to raise your taxes, right? So everything requires, a certain amount of angels to run things, and I know that that's asking for a lot, but you've got to have either checks and balances or something. The point here is it's how our money works now. Gold's not going to fix anything. It's going to make it worse. And with a few tweaks, it would be beautiful and awesome. You wouldn't have to tax people. You wouldn't have to worry about a national debt if you just realize it's not an obligation. And you'd realize that it's the nation's credit and the people's credit that's able to create money no matter, in either circumstance. Those things the feds have in common with people. We both have credit. We both use that credit to create money. There's no problem in that. It's proof positive that it should be there. Although, when, like the guy does explain, when the government just prints money to give to, he explains it his way, not very well. When the government just prints money for wars, like, and gives it to Ukraine or to Israel, that's not what's affecting our inflation. That money's overseas. That money's being turned into bombs, and the only people that benefit are like Raytheon or, you know what I mean, whoever's got the munitions to sell. So you could roundabout say, well, the munitions people are putting food in their fridge and paying their mortgages with that money, so that's good. I don't know. There's some good that comes from that, right? There's some good that paying people money, you know. But then again, maybe it's just a laundering scheme too. Maybe we just give them all this money and then Zelensky runs a trick and it goes back into the DNC or something. I don't know. All right. That wouldn't surprise me. But the guy does explain, like, okay, yeah, if angels were in charge, they wouldn't be printing this money, even though they can. They would be applying it where they could apply it to whatever good cause, like infrastructure in the United States or whatever good cause there could be. And then that money would go directly to the companies that are going to build the roads, build the bridges, build the light rails, whatever it is. Okay, and then that trickles down to the people that work there and they fill their fridges up. Okay, but people shouldn't be afraid that there's money, because people shouldn't be afraid that there's, not enough resources. If there's plenty of resources, then there's plenty of money, always. All right? God bless.